मेरा पेन भूल गया। मेरा पेन पे मोबाइल। अभी वो वेरीफाई करके सब। हाँ। वो ये भी देख लोगे आराम से लोग। इधर का कोई पुरुष बोला जी, अकाउंट भी लोगे। सर चिंता मत करो, मैं ट्रांसफर करता हूँ।
India was given autonomy. Yeah, I mean, I was a teacher actually, so, but just 10 years old teacher, so I didn't really understand anything about economics. And then suddenly, from all along, with one hand tied at the back and saying that, what do we do? Finance secretary keeps on tying us up, discussing and giving us the kind of market rate, etc., which we have to do. And all people merely able to read the GRs properly and so on. And for this section, administered interest section, all of us know what happened. That was an excellent excuse that we had. The moment we had autonomy, people didn't know what it meant. I mean, get up in the morning and you're told you're autonomous now. So now what? What do I do? I remember your DG getting angry and in fact writing an article talking about the mentality of that shepherding mentality of banks asking, what is the reference rate says to emerge from the market. What are you asking us for? Then of course they had that third mentality they followed the Bank of India. So the limited point I'm trying to make here is with growth, whatever uncertainty, if you are strong enough as a country, then you can have sufficient autonomy to exercise your own price stability and the kind of stuff that you talk about. Technical are very important for the students.
Not your way. You should dilute that position.
Read that properly. So it's really the Purikuttar Buranditna kind of idea. That if you are strong enough, then okay, external, bring them on kind of attitude we can take. Otherwise, we can't. Earlier, we were not able to do that. Today, Reserve Bank of India is in a different place and in some senses bad because nowadays we find that even in the press, you find controversy between the finance secretary and Reserve Bank of India governor and the finance minister happening. They always happened, but they happened indoors. Now we are Reserve Bank is becoming more whatever. So anyway, this is the kind of few points I wanted to make with respect to this. If there is anything urgent that you want, of course I'll ask the organizers because now we are 2 minutes past the 45 mark that we had. We are forgetting about the 15-minute thing, break. People don't want tea. Tea has come. So then I think anyone has any, if not, we'll have a quick cup of tea in 10 minutes and return, catch hold of these gentlemen to ask and harass them with your questions. Thank you very much.
नाही शेवट झाला नाही मला 5:30 ला मीटिंग आहे घरी जाऊन
Okay. Okay. No problem. No problem. Yeah. After 5 minutes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. No problem.
Sir,
Uh,
just ask them to
yeah. 5 minutes.
some
How do we start?
Ask them if you're audible.
Are they seeing me? Am I audible?
Yes, sir, just ask.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Vinay, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Very good. So I'll share the slides and see whether you can see full screen. Okay.
Sure, sir.
Huh?
Tell him post disable the screen share.
What is it?
No, sir.
Ah.
Tell them that host have disabled presenting. So they have to create-
See, my screen sharing is disabled. Can you enable it, Vinay? Hello? Screen, I can't share anything on host disabled participant screen sharing. It comes like that.
Hello, for him, he doesn't know that.
Yes.
It's coming like that. I don't know if we can.
Is it coming? This one?
Again, repeat.
Share? I don't know whether they're able to see. Maximize it.
Light बंद करना.
Could you see my slides?
Yes, sir. Your presentation is on.
Full screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You are able to see me also in the small window?
Yes, sir.
Okay. No problem. Yeah. So tell me, when should I start?
So you can initiate.
I think Abhay, Abhay is there, right?
समझ में नहीं आ रहा प्रेजेंटेशन चालू है ना स्क्रीन शेयरिंग चालू है
You can hear me now.
I can hear you, Abhay. How are you?
I am fine, thank you.
Yeah.
Now, Anuradha will begin.
Welcome back after this short tea break and a very warm welcome to you, Ramchandran sir. So we have arrived to the valedictory session of this seminar. I would like to request Professor Bharti Kamath to introduce our valedictory speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce to the audience Professor M. Ramachandran, who has close to 2 decades of teaching and research experience. He has been associated with several organizations, including
Where is volume?
the School of Economics and Public Policy. Currently, he is teaching at Pondicherry University, and earlier he was an RBI chair professor at the Institute for Social and Economic Change. Professor Ramachandran has more than 50 research articles published in the journals such as Oxford Economic Papers, Economic Letters, Journal of Public Policy Modeling, EPW, etc. And he has also presented several papers in national and international conferences. Professor Ramachandran was also the Vice President at the Indian Econometric Society and President of the Indian Econometric Society from 20 to 23. Sir, we are honored to welcome you to this valedictory section. I hand over the mic to
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, Professor Ramachandran,
Yes.
I'm supposed to be in chair here, so I'm in chair.
Yeah.
And
You are in the chair. Okay.
I'm not going to make any comments to begin with. Maybe
Okay.
we end a little bit if we
Yes.
have time.
Yes.
My request is that you should, try and how much time do you think you will take for this?
How much time you will give me?
Half an hour.
Half an hour. Fantastic. I'll.
5 minutes plus.
Ah.
Yeah.
No, I will be very, very sharp in timing. So don't worry. Actually, I'll take half an hour and finish it. No problem.
35 minutes is.
Yes. Probably 5 minutes plus or minus. Okay. Yeah.
Okay,
Fine.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
So at the outset, I would like to thank Professor Manisha Karni, the director of Mumbai School of Economics, Professor Anuradha Patnaik, the seminar coordinator, and my friend Professor Swadhi Raju for getting me this opportunity. And I also feel deeply honored to have my former colleague and my friend Professor Abhay Pete to have as a chairperson for this speech. See, I have two sections in my presentation. One is first the story about the reserve accumulation. Second, what is the implication of such accumulation for the conduct of monetary policy? This is how I have planned my presentation. Okay. So to begin with, if you see these last 3 decades, it witnessed a huge accumulation of reserves across the world. And this accumulation is largely by emerging economies. If you see this IMF classification that provides this data, they classify that the emerging and the developing countries together held around, say, 0.25 trillion US dollar worth of reserve in the year 1991, which accounted for almost 25% of the total world reserves. Subsequently, there has been a steady rise in reserve holding by these countries, and it touched its peak of 7.45 trillion in the year 2022, which roughly amounts to around 60% of the world reserve holding. Another important aspect of this reserve holding in the recent time reflects the fact that nearly 50% of the total world reserve are held by only 5 countries. That is, in the order, it is by China, Japan, Switzerland, Taiwan, and India. So India is one among the top 5 reserve holding countries by holding around, say, 521.4 billion US dollar worth of reserve. It stands 5th largest reserve holding country in the world. And these are the top reserve holding countries in the world. If you see, China ranks first, Japan second, Switzerland third, Taiwan, province of China, that is fourth, India fifth. And there are countries, they all have accumulated so much of reserves, mostly the emerging countries. Now, next, this is the trend in reserve accumulation by India. You all know that in the beginning of 90s, especially in 1990, our reserve position was only 4 billion, which was sufficient enough to meet only 2 weeks of import. A humiliating situation. It was considered as a humiliating situation by the policymakers and on the government side. And that is a time that we started adopting number of reforms. In fact, we moved out of a sort of dual exchange rate system, thinking that we may not be able to sustain such a framework, and moved into a sort of managed float in the year 1993. And we had to take number of steps to accumulate reserve, to have a comfort. And by 2000, almost we could accumulate around 40 billion US dollar worth of reserve, which was equivalent to around 7 months of import. Our then RBI governor, Dr. Y.V. Reddy, used to describe this as because he was part of the whole program, okay, in different capacity in Reserve Bank of India, as a secretary in Government of India. So he used to describe this as a journey from agony to comfort. Subsequently, the reserve, there was a steady and sharp rise in reserve. And if you see this by almost, 2007 and towards, end of 2007, the level of reserve crossed 300 billion US dollar. And there was a huge discussion that time that it became a problem of plenty. And we had a, plan to have a Tobin tax kind of things on inflow of capital and, so many issues. Then 2008 financial meltdown, taught us a different lesson. Okay. And the sharp fall, if you see this in the year 2008, it reflects that RBI lost almost $40 billion in the market to defend the value of currency, value of rupee. But immediately after that, we kept on accumulating reserve, and now it sometime it touched 600 plus billion. Now we have almost around, say, $584 billion worth of reserve. So this is the story of reserve accumulation by India over a period of time. But this is just an absolute, amount of reserve. But this is the reserve as a ratio of, GDP, as percentage of GDP. If you see that it was in the beginning of 90s, it was less than, let us say 5%. Now it touched its maximum of, say, 25%. Then it was, coming down and falling. And, in terms of percentage of GDP also, there is a continuous rise in reserve, but in the recent time, it is stagnating. And the another important indicator is how many months of import reserve can support. That's a major concern for most of these emerging countries in the recent time period, that there are certain rules of thumb that the amount of reserve at any time period, given the current situation, should be equivalent to at least 6 months of import. Okay, it's a rule of thumb. And if you see this, it was less than 3 months of import in the beginning, and it touched almost 16, 17 months, equivalent to 16 months of import in the year 2005 and 6. Then there was a sudden fall. This fall reflected the loss of reserve when there was a financial meltdown, and there is a volume of rise in the volume of import. Okay, so because of these reasons, there was a declining trend. Again, it picked up. Okay, it almost touched 6 months in the year 2013. Again, it picked up, and now we are holding around the level of reserve is equivalent around 8 months of import. This is a rule of thumb basically used to decide the adequacy of reserve by most of the countries. Another important thing is what is our short-term external debt exposure? That means what is the remaining? What is the amount of debt due to be repaid in a year to come? We call it as a short-term external debt, which has a remaining maturity period of, say, 1 year. Okay, if you take, there is a, Gaidotti rule that says that, Greenspan-Gaidotti rule, which is very popular in the literature, that says that the amount of reserve at any time period should be equivalent to at least 1 year of short-term external debt. So in that way, in this graph, we put this reserve to short-term external debt. If you see that there was a sharp rise from 91 to it was equivalent to 25 times of the short-term external debt exposure that India had in the year 2005 and 6. Then there was a sudden decline because there was huge short-term debt accumulated through trade credit in the form of trade credit during this period. Now, at least we have the level of reserve, which is equivalent to, say, 5-6 times of the short-term external debt exposure. So then I thought that I should calculate in terms of these adequacy indicators. Is there any, what is the level of excess reserve that the country is holding? And in terms of import cover, if you take as a 6 months of import as a benchmark, then the amount of reserve which is in excess of 6 months worth of import, is being plotted here. If you see sometime in the 90s up to 2000, it was close to 6 months. Then there was a rise. Then again in 2013, it touched the bottom level. Now we are in a comfortable position. Okay, so this is the amount of excess reserve that we are holding according to this indicator is almost 150 billion US dollar. Okay, so now the excess reserve in terms of these, Alan Greenspan and Gaidotti rule says that, it is around, say, 495 billion, around 490 billion US dollar worth. So all these, data, indicate that, with no ambiguity that definitely we have reserve which is in excess of what is ideally required. Okay, given the kind of exchange rate arrangement that we have. Okay, all this, indicators indicate that. Okay, so now why to accumulate excess reserve when it is, not required, as it is being suggested by some of these indicators. Okay, widely used indicators in the policy circle. Okay, what is the advantage of it? Is it voluntarily being held, or it is an outcome of the kind of exchange rate management and arrangement these countries are, are trying to sustain? Okay, and here in this case, not only India, most of the countries, if you take these indicators, it looks as if they are all holding reserves in excess of what is ideally required. Now, let me come to this point. Reserve holding is not definitely incurs a cost. Of course, it has a lot of benefits, but this cost is discussed in the context of holding excess reserve. Okay, so if you see this, the first important thing is, especially in emerging countries, there are alternate assets that yield much better return as compared to the return earned by these foreign assets. In fact, these foreign assets provide very negligible return. Most of these years, they were providing less than 1% of return, whereas the alternate asset investment opportunities available in these countries provide 6 to 7% return. So there is a huge opportunity cost, and many empirical studies worked out this opportunity cost, which is very significant. In fact, Rotrick, argues that there is a social cost. The social cost is that the cost at which these foreign assets are acquired, okay, it comes into the country through different channels, and the return the assets are offering, there is a huge difference. Okay, and Rotrick works out such cost, the social cost, somewhere around 1% of GDP for developing countries. Okay, and there are other problems of holding excess reserve. It leads to moral hazard problem sometimes. It induces the private sector to take much more, more risk than what is warranted, and it exposes countries to valuation risk that even add to political economy challenges. Okay, which often undermines the central bank autonomy, which is very essential. Central bank autonomy is very essential, in order to achieve the goals they set in. So then there is another argument especially by Bernanke and others, that these reserve accumulation by emerging economies, okay, reflects there is a global savings glut, and which is also experienced in the world for some time before the pandemic situation, that depressed interest rate all over the world, and that created an environment conducive to global economic crisis. Okay, so these are the arguments against holding excess reserve, because there is a huge cost involved in holding excess reserve. And despite the cost, which is, some of the estimates, available estimates, show that, which is very significant, okay, countries are accumulating reserve. Okay, so for what purpose, and what is the consequences of doing this? This is I'm going to discuss next. See, what is the gentle reason behind reserve accumulation? I thought let me have a brief summary of the traditional views and of late what are the reason that dominated prompted the countries to accumulate more reserves. As you all aware of the conventional approach that is inspired by this mercantilist views. They say that do everything, design the policy to promote export and discourage import and accumulate foreign wealth as much as possible. A sort of export-led growth was the option of mercantilists in those days. Later, there was a rise in the occurrence of financial crisis in the last 3 decades, as you are aware of it. And there is a significant rise in the volume and frequency of cross-border capital flows because most of the countries are moved into convertibility and capital account, and there is a huge rise in the cross-border capital flows. And these developments, resulted in accumulation of reserves, especially by emerging countries. Under such circumstances, accumulation of reserve became a mandate. As it serves as insurance against a sudden stop and reversal of capital. This is what Rotary pointed out some time back, that these countries are vulnerable to sudden stop and reversal of capital. Under such circumstances, to avoid wild fluctuation in exchange rate, the central bank or the authorities should maintain enough cushion of reserve to absorb the shocks. So that is basically precautionary motive turned out to be an important reason behind such a accumulation of reserve. Now, this prompted me to check with some of these top reserve holding countries what is their official claim. And as far as the intervention in the forex market is concerned, and I have taken the top reserve holding countries, and in terms of statement, if you take for instance China, they say in the official document that to keep the exchange rate stable at an adaptive and an equilibrium level. And if you take Japan, then they try to stabilize the value of exchange rate. See, although the statement, there is no unanimity, across these countries in while claiming the purpose of intervening in the forex market, and there is a central element of commonality among the top reserve holders that emphasizes the concern over promoting and preserving exchange rate stability. And India also, as you are aware, that always the official claim is that they don't peg or target the exchange rate, or they don't fix any range for exchange rate. But the intervention is mainly to avoid undue fluctuations, basically to meet out the lumpy demand and lumpy supply. When there is a huge inflow, they absorb the reserve. When there is a outflow of capital, they try to defend the currency value. So it is basically the policy adopted by all these countries seem to be like leaning against the wind. If the intention is to stabilize exchange rate, then the intervention is basically leaning against the wind, minimizing the volatility of exchange rate. So when the currency is under pressure to appreciate, they will purchase. When the currency is under pressure to depreciate, they sell and defend the value of domestic currency. So this is a leaning against the wind policy to stabilize the exchange rate. So this is what actually the official claim reflects, that they all want to lean against the wind through intervention. And this is the Calvo and Reinhardt, they pointed out that although these countries claim that they have floated their exchange rate, or they have gone for a sort of managed float, allowing the currency to be determined by market forces, but the intervention is only to minimize the volatility. Actually, most of these intervention resemble a sort of non-credible peg. So that means there is a de facto peg. The what is in practice is a de facto peg, although they claim that it is a de facto float. Hence, they strongly argue with the empirical evidences that the so-called demise of fixed exchange rate is a myth. And they also provide evidence that the fear of exchange rate movement, is pervasive even among some developed countries. So that means it warranted active intervention by the central bank, even if they claim that it is officially a sort of float, and we allow the exchange rate to move in tandem with fundamentals and capital inflows and outflows. Now, there are two graphs that I have given. The first one is the volatility of intervention, and the volatility measure was constructed using an appropriate Garch model. And if you look at that, there is a different time period. Up to 2010, intervention seems to be very active. And after 2010, intervention is not very active, according to the volatility of intervention. If you look at the exchange rate volatility, you see, during 2008 to 2013, the volatility is very large. Otherwise, it was quite calm. Okay. And the variance of exchange rate is not much volatile. Okay. See, what it indicates that the volatility of intervention is rising or falling. What does it mean that actually there is an active intervention in the forex market that reflects that there is a fear of float? This is what the Calvo and Reinhardt paper document. Okay, fine. So although they have floated, most of these countries try to bring more flexibility in the exchange rate, and there seems to be a fear of float always, and that warrants active intervention in the forex market, and that ultimately results in accumulation of reserve when there is continuous inflow of capital. This is what these people are arguing. And now, if there is an active intervention to minimize the volatility, which is triggered by the frequency of increase in the frequency of capital, cross-border capital flows, then they have to adopt leaning against the wind policy to stabilize the exchange rate. Okay. See, strictly speaking, if the change in exchange rate that reflects the amount of appreciation and depreciation, if it is normally distributed over a period of time, then the leaning against the wind with an intention to minimize the volatility of exchange rate where should I put this? Okay. Just a minute. Exchange rate need not change the level of reserve, because there is an equal opportunity of appreciation and depreciation. And when the rupee is under pressure to depreciate, they run down the reserve. When the rupee is under pressure to appreciate, they purchase and accumulate. So if the pressure is normally distributed, then the leaning against wind policy need not result in accumulation of reserve. Alternatively, if the distribution of change in exchange rate is negatively skewed, that means there is too much of appreciating pressure in the sample, the period under consideration, then there is a clear possibility of reserve accumulation as a consequence of such leaning against wind policy. In the same vein, one can argue that if the change in exchange rate is positively skewed, that means there is too many depreciating pressure, then there must have been eventual decumulation of reserve. But what is the fact that we have been continuously accumulating reserve over a period of time? And when we look at the exchange rate scenario of most of these emerging economies, including India, there is a secular tendency of currencies vis-a-vis US dollar to depreciate over a period of time. You know that what was the dollar price, rupee price of dollar in early 90s and what is now. If you see this trend, the appreciation possibility of currency was hardly witnessed during this period. So implying thereby that intervention that intends to stabilize exchange rate should have resulted in loss of reserve. But in contrast, we have been accumulating reserve. That means there must be some hidden reason that must be discovered. Okay. So that, that in fact prompted me and some of the people in the, literature, what could be the reason, okay? What could be the additional reason, okay, which needs to be discovered? I think this is the paper that I have published jointly with Srinivasan in Economics Letter. Is a brief note appeared in Economics Letters sometime in 2007. What we try to find out that whether there is asymmetry in the official intervention or not. You see, asymmetry in this sense, suppose the currency is under pressure to appreciate and the RBI wants to penalize it more aggressively than what they do with a depreciating pressure of the same magnitude. If there is asymmetry, if there is asymmetry in official intervention in that direction, then what happens is when the rupee is under pressure to appreciate, they aggressively buy. But when the rupee is under pressure to depreciate, they become little lenient. Either they sell or they don't sell, allow the currency to depreciate. Such asymmetric intervention eventually over a period of time, and even in the face of continuous inflow of a net inflow of capital, okay, will definitely result in accumulation of reserve. Okay, it will become a passive absorption of reserve as and when it comes into the country and puts pressure on rupee to appreciate. Okay, so this is the first study that we found. There were strong empirical support that official intervention in the forex market reflected this sort of asymmetry. Subsequently, there are a number of empirical studies following this, okay, that document evidences in favor of the claim that there is a fear of appreciation. Now, from the fear of float, although countries went for floating the currency and there is a de facto peg, okay. Now, what we found out, okay, is that there is on the part, especially on the part of the emerging countries, they have a fear of appreciation. So whenever the currency is under pressure to appreciate, they aggressively buy and accumulate reserve. In fact, in empirical models, this asymmetry, the variable that captures this asymmetry turned out to be highly significant, and it improved the explanatory power of those models. So that these evidences support the idea that asymmetric intervention in the forex market in favor of penalizing the appreciation much more than penalizing the depreciation is the root cause for accumulation of reserve, especially in the recent time period. Okay, this is an important finding that we had, and these studies have done the same thing for other emerging economies, and they found this asymmetry. Now I'll, okay, whatever may be the reason, okay, we have accumulated so much of reserve and there is excess reserve, and we are sure that holding excess reserve has a cost, and we are prepared to bear the cost knowingly, okay. That's one side. Now, whether it has brought any problem or complications in the context of monetary policy, which is more important, aspect. And when we talk about monetary policy, let me bring this up. Given the current exchange rate arrangement, especially by emerging countries, the most important objectives of monetary policy is price stability and exchange rate stability. Because exchange rate stability turned out to be very important because we opened up the capital flows, okay, and there is a frequent outflow and inflow, and that brings a lot of variation in exchange rate, volatility in exchange rate. So central bank intervention or authorities intervention in the market is warranted because these emerging countries markets are not that resilient as the developed countries have. Okay. Now, price stability, exchange rate stability, or whatever may be the goal of monetary authority that they want to achieve by setting their instruments, what is more important is the central bank, they should independency. the central bank independence is one of the important aspect of the successful monetary policy. I think Cook Ehrman and there are a lot of Cook Ehrman is the most important person who contributed to this literature that central bank independence helps achieving the targets much effectively. Having said this, I would like to show some graphs. Okay, now this is a historical data. So what is there on the vertical axis is the decadal average inflation for various decades. And here in the horizontal axis, we have growth rate of money supply. That means the average growth of money for each decade. And, you see this, if you take this 1930s, and the 1930s had lower money growth, lower inflation. If you take 40s, higher money growth, higher inflation. And there is a clear evidence of upward trend relationship between these two. And this is one of the important piece of evidences based on which Milton Friedman claims that inflation is always a monetary phenomenon. Okay, let me show you another graph. This is one particular decade, and he has taken only 90s for several countries, almost more than 150 countries. What happened to the inflation of these countries in the 90s? Okay, average inflation from 1991 to 2000. Okay, and the corresponding decades growth rate of money, which is there in the horizontal axis. And if you see these plots, it is also showing a positive trend. Okay, what does it mean? That the countries had higher money growth also experienced a higher inflation. The countries which had lower money growth experienced lower inflation. And so this is the evidence based on which Friedman claims that inflation is everywhere monetary phenomenon. The graph that I have shown previously and this one, and this is these are the two things that prompted him to make this statement that inflation is always a monetary phenomenon, everywhere a monetary phenomenon. Now, the idea is that, inflation policy is forward looking. The monetary policy is forward looking. They try to anchor expected inflation. Okay, this is the framework. So, under such a framework, price stability is very important so that the discovery of future inflation, the forecast of future inflation becomes less complicated. Okay, so the success depends upon how perfect we are in forecasting the future inflation. Okay, so having said this, okay, since it's a completely monetary phenomenon, and the countries which would like to stabilize prices, obviously they should mind stabilizing the growth rate of money. Now, we are not bothering about growth rate of money because the demand for money has become unstable and all these arguments are there. Now, every country is focusing on, fixing the interest rate. Okay, both are one and the same because they are mutually exclusive. If you plan to target growth rate of money, then you cannot target interest rate. If you want to target interest rate, then you cannot target growth rate of money. That is the reason why that they focused only on interest rate target. And as you know that Reserve Bank of India trying to do this through the introduction of LAF, liquidity adjustment facilities, and they fix the repo rate and reverse repo rate. Depending upon their expectation about the inflation, they tighten the liquidity. So they try to provide a corridor for the short interest rate, which will have its impulses towards the inflation in the future. Okay, this is a kind of framework that we have. Fine. But there is another thing that I said that central bank independence is an important thing if at all they want to achieve this. This is the evidence that when I was a faculty in Bombay University, and then this is the paper inspired me to look at the central bank independence and inflation relationship. Okay. And this graph is taken from the source, Alesina and Summer, who wrote this paper in 1993. Look at this, that in the horizontal axis, we have an index of central bank independency, and the average rate of inflation is given on the vertical axis. And some of these countries, this central bank independence is a plot, scatter plot of various countries, central bank independency and average inflation. Look at this Switzerland and Germany, and they have the highest central bank independency and experienced a lower rate of inflation. Whereas look at New Zealand and Spanish and Italy, and these countries had very limited central bank independency, experienced a higher rate of inflation. And you see that it is these two variables are systematically and negatively correlated. And this is one of the reasons why in the literature on central bank independency, kept on arguing that central bank independence, without central bank independence, it becomes difficult to achieve even the prime objective, that stabilizing or targeting inflation. Okay. And this is another graph, that scatter plot that they provided in their paper. Again, here it is variance of inflation, okay, in the vertical axis instead of inflation. Now, again, I see that's what I see. The most of the empirical literature says the variance of inflation increases with the rise in inflation, because for a number of reasons. Okay, I don't want to get into that. The same fact is getting reflected in this scatter plot. If countries have larger independency, the variance of inflation is also low, and vice versa. Okay. So central bank independency or credibility of the central bank policy are important aspects, if at all they want to succeed with whatever, targets they set. Okay. So having said this, what happens because of reserve accumulation and what has happened in the last 3 decades? Now, every economy has a market for domestic currency and there is a market for foreign currency. Let us assume that there is net inflow of capital. Definitely, this creates a disequilibrium in the foreign currency market within the country. Here, the disequilibrium is excess supply of foreign currency. Definitely, this too much of foreign currency will put pressure on domestic currency to appreciate. Okay. And parallelly, what happens to the market for domestic currency? When there is excess supply of foreign currency and people who have this money try to convert them into domestic currency, so this will create excess demand for domestic currency. And this excess demand for domestic currency will put pressure on foreign currency to appreciate. So what happens when there is net inflow of capital? This is a very elementary common sense, but for analytical reason, I'm trying to explain it. When there is a net inflow, the foreign currency becomes cheaper, the domestic currency becomes dearer. Okay. Now, the kind of exchange rate management that the central bank or the authority would like to maintain in most of these countries is basically, they call it as a managed float or minimizing volatility and things like that. Now, when such things are happening, when there is a pressure on domestic currency to appreciate, and as I pointed out, when there is a fear of appreciation, then definitely it warrants intervention, and the RBI or central bank or authority comes to the market and try to absorb this pressure, and they don't want to allow the exchange rate to absorb the pressure. Okay. Under such circumstances, they have to buy foreign currency from the market. That means accumulation of reserve takes place. When they buy foreign currency, obviously they sell domestic currency. So when they sell domestic currency, the domestic money supply increases. Okay. So this is an outcome of the capital inflow on domestic money supply. It leads to ultimately expansion of money supply. And the expansion of money supply automatically, obviously, built inflationary expectation. So this is a consequences of, okay, this is a consequence of the capital inflow into the country. And this is going to happen, this is bound to happen when a central bank or the authority keeps accumulating reserve. Keep accumulating reserve means what? The domestic money supply is expanding and building, this inflationary pressure. Okay, the expected inflation tends to increase. Now, can they leave it like this? Okay, And because in an attempt to stabilize exchange rate, okay, in an attempt to stabilize exchange rate, they come to the market and they absorb the shock on exchange rate so that exchange rate is insulated from the appreciating pressure. But at the same time, this leads to expansion of domestic money supply. And you know the consequence, as it is being documented by n number of empirical literature, that it is going to build up inflationary expectation. Now, what we are doing over a period of time, okay? The authority cannot ignore price, inflationary pressure, just leave it in the market, because they have to do something. Because price stability is an important, objective of monetary policy. So how do they suck out this excess liquidity that came through this capital inflow? They sell bonds. This is, that this is to basically to absorb the suck out this excess liquidity from the market, they sell bonds. And selling bonds is an open market operation, okay? In the, so, or in other words, I'll put it like this. See, suppose when there is excess liquidity coming into the domestic market, there is a pressure on, especially the short rate, call money rate, say for instance, there is a pressure on this rate to goes down, okay? Now, there is a reverse repo rate at that promises, the RBI promises that this is a rate at which we would like to borrow from the market. So all this excess liquidity, they have to absorb. Otherwise, the reverse repo rate, the call money rate, the market rate, or the interest rate at the short end of the financial market will go below repo rate. So they come and absorb this liquidity, okay? So that the call money rate moves within the corridor and they don't breach the band of repo rate and reverse repo rate. Okay, this is an important aspect. So, okay, they absorb this liquidity through selling open market sale of bond. Okay, what happens is over a period of, if you do this continuously, there are a lot of studies that provides empirical evidence to show that such kind of continuous absorption of liquidity through open market operation puts pressure on the domestic interest rate, or at least it keeps the interest rate downwardly rigid. If there is an upward pressure on interest rate or it keeps it downwardly rigid, it has its own adverse consequences on the growth prospects of the economy. That is one thing. And if there is a rise in interest rate, that would hello. So when there is a rise in interest rate, that leads to further inflow of capital. Okay, what's the time? Yeah, I'll take another 5 minutes. It's like
your battery is running low, so you can wrap up in 2 minutes.
Is it okay now?
No, it's running low, but I'll take care of it. You can wrap up now.
So volume is low?
No, volume is not low, but you can wrap up, I said now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So when there is upward pressure on interest rate, it has its own implication on growth and investment activities. And the worst thing, it might lead to further capital inflows. Okay. And see, this leads to, this creates a vicious cycle that downward pressure, this upward pressure on interest rate attracts more capital, then it puts a pressure on exchange rate, and this complication come. So what happens ultimately is it's difficult to have hello,
Can't hear you.
What is the problem? It's muted. No, it's not muted, no. Just a minute. It's not muted, no.
But we are able to hear you, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not muted. So let me continue. Shall I continue?
Yeah, continue, but wrap up.
So okay, okay. It leads to now. What has happened is, in the Indian context, all these decades, there is continuous inflow. There is a pressure on exchange rate to appreciate, and there is asymmetry. and that resulted in accumulation of official reserve, and there is a continuous sterilization, and the RBI had to run down all its domestic securities in the market. Okay, and that has brought a huge structural change in the balance sheet of the RBI. Okay, and that is the outcome. The next slide will you just look at this. This will tell you how much we have sterilized. If you see this is a consolidated balance sheet of Reserve Bank of India. A consolidated balance sheet means balance sheet of issue department as well as the banking department. If you see the scenario in 1990, foreign assets were this many crores and domestic assets are this much. The domestic assets constituted around 96.31% of the total assets of RBI against which currency was issued. But when you look at the data, recent data, 2023 March, domestic asset is almost zero. In fact, in RBI balance sheet, the government securities holding is the domestic assets with which they used to conduct open market operation is almost 0% of the total asset. In fact, the entire currency issue, okay, and the notes in circulation is being packed by foreign assets. And this is a situation we normally call it as a currency board, okay, currency board. And this is an outcome of such a drastic change in the balance sheet of RBI over a period of time is an outcome of the kind of exchange rate management that RBI wants to maintain. Okay, not only that, what we had seen is, okay, price stability and the exchange rate stability, they cannot go hand in hand. Okay, and if they cannot go hand in hand, there is a conflict of there is a conflict between achieving these two targets simultaneously. Then the central bank autonomy is lost. Okay, and if you ask anyone that what is a major problem in the context of monetary policy confronted by most of these emerging economies in the recent time, the immediate answer is impossible trinity. So this is what I would like to conclude. The kind of exchange rate arrangement that we wanted to maintain over a period of time brought complication in the conduct of monetary policy. In fact, that pushed the policymaking body to confront this impossible trinity. And these are the evidences that I would like to present. Okay, thank you. This is all. That's all from my side. Abhay, thank you so much for the opportunity given to me. And now, if there is any comment, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I think there's just a couple of comments. One is, of course, the quality of these reserves and whether they could be used for domestic infrastructure building is a discussion that is continuing. Not in line with what you are talking about it from a monetarist point of view. And, you have given these prudential norms now. Once you have these prudential norms, can we not make them into wood and try to see that we maintain them? Otherwise, they are going to lead to the costs of the kind that you have talked about. Finally, I mean, there is a very deep issue about when you try to link up inflation and all that. If you look at the picture, it's fine to look at the countries that you were talking about. Their inflation is fairly straightforward, and their Friedman's thing about inflation being always a monetary phenomena is quite true. But that's a truism. As my friend Frank Khan used to say, it is like saying the price of butter is a butter phenomenon. But that doesn't lead to any great insight, see, when it comes to Indian inflation. And there might be problem with that. But these are issues that one could discuss in a seminar. You can't discuss a valedictory address. So
Yeah,
thank
that's
you very much for coming here and this. And
but at least the first thing that you had pointed out, the major argument, see, this idea is getting floated that why can't we use it? These are all short-term assets, okay? And if we are trying to use it for infrastructure building, you are blocking it in a long-term, investment. And that is the main reason that we cannot use this. But countries like China, their reserve accumulation happens basically because there is huge surplus in the current account. Okay, and they can afford to divert some part of this reserve for this kind of infrastructure building, and they have gone to put the money in the stock market also. Okay, but as far as the inflation aspect is concerned, as you said, it requires a lot of debate.
In fact, have a debate on this because
Yes.
the short market we converted into long term through
Yeah.
financial innovation, but a separate issue.
Yeah.
I think we should thank Anuradha for allowing us to meet virtually, and Anuradha, you take over now. Huh? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abhais. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for accepting our invitation to give this valedictory address. And a big thank you to Peti sir also for chairing 2 sessions back to back and managing so well the time and all. We are not, I think we are delayed by 15 minutes as per the original schedule. Yeah, so I now come to the last leg of the seminar, which is always the vote of thanks. I won't take much time, just 2 minutes. Any big event is always the outcome of teamwork, and no amount of thanking is enough. So this is just a gratitude towards everyone who has contributed in some way or the other. I'd like to thank our director, ma'am, for giving me this opportunity to organize this seminar. Also for helping me and guiding me at every stage, and also clearing so many administrative bottlenecks which I wouldn't have been able to manage. I extend my sincere gratitude to all our distinguished speakers, chairs, and specifically to Pete sir and Deshpande sir. I really don't have words to express my thanks to both of you. I also want to thank Mala ma'am for sharing all the details about the seminar. I got a Word file in which, a folder in which there were 62 documents, which gave me the outline of what to do, and but still all the mistakes are mine. Swati ma'am, I really don't have any word because she has been a constant source of support, inspiration, and guiding me with all the nitty-gritties that had to be kept in mind. Bharti, she's always my friend. I can fall back on her anytime. Professor my late night, he always has late night solutions to my problems because I can call him at 10:30, 11 also, and he comes out with a solution. So thank you so much, Professor Kote, for giving all the help and support whenever I have required. Yes. Now coming to Rashi and Arpita, they've been like the moving souls behind this entire or the organizing behind this event. So I don't want to say thank you to them. It's a very small word for it. Vinay Verma and Vinay Shelke, they are always there. Yes, ma'am. This is the solution. This is what we can do. So too grateful to both of you. And our PhD students, Puraskar, Swati, and Prasad, and MA students who volunteered, and all the students who sat throughout the seminar. So I just conclude with this little thing that our office staff, Rahul, Smita, Meena, Yanikar, Parker, all helped me. So I just am grateful for to each and everyone. And yes, Gaurav joined in on his own. I did not call him, but he came on his own. ICSSR. And yes, this is one last thing that I really want to tell. Yesterday there was no water in ICSSR. Like there was a big crisis, and Mr. Ajit Karnik and Manisha ma'am, they all coordinated and we got water. So that was a big thing that happened. Sorry, that's a mistake. Yeah. Thank you so much.
You can sign off. I think you can sign off actually.